Welcome to the webinar, and thank you for joining us today as we address the topic of environmental, social, and governance, also known as ESG, and where today we will be talking about ESG for the construction industry. Our guest speaker today is Isobel O'Connell, a senior ESG consultant, and today's webinar is sponsored by PhilConnect. PhilConnect is the dirt exchange marketplace for the construction and landscaping industry. PhilConnect is on a mission to encourage sustainability by enhancing industry collaboration and reuse of excavated and dredged material. Now, our objective here today is to get an overview of ESG and how it can apply to the construction industry, because construction touches every segment of the market. Every residential, commercial, industrial, and public infrastructure project requires some form of construction. And ESG is evolving and addresses a variety of factors. That's why we'll be covering the important facets of ESG, who does ESG apply to, examples of failed and successful ESG, and some common myths. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A session, so please keep all your questions till the end and we'll get them addressed. And that's why we're super excited to have here with us today Isobel O'Connell. Isobel is a senior ESG consultant and award honoree with expertise on change management, social and environmental impact and risk, strategy and reporting, addressing the intersection between commerce and sustainability. Her ESG expertise includes business development, strategy, regulation and compliance reviews, as well as risk and disclosure management. She is known for building bridges between the project world, organizations, and communities to achieve cost-benefit driven results in industries like global consultancies, port operations, oil and gas, alternative energy, and mining. On the call today, we also have Mana Arabi, CEO and co-founder of PhilConnect. Mana is a civil engineer with over 20 years' experience in the North American construction industry, as well as myself, Huwaida Carter, and I will be your moderator. So please go ahead, Isobel. I'll pass over the presentation to you and we'll let you walk us through ESG for the construction industry.
Thank you, Huwaida, and thank you everyone for attending today. It's a pleasure to be a part of this inaugural initiative with PhilConnect, and very exciting to have a few people from other geographic locations outside of Vancouver and British Columbia. So ESG is first and foremost a combination of financial and ethical considerations for companies, investors, and secondarily stakeholders to consider. It refers to the three key non-financial factors in evaluating a company's risk profile and performance. So that is environment, social, and governance. For today, I'm going to just focus on the perspective of the company with the perspective of the stakeholders, but not so much the stakeholders and the investment. So we're really going to be focusing in on the company. So ESG started out as HSE, then HSE, so health and safety, and environment, then health, safety, and community, then CSR, corporate social responsibility, and now ESG, environment, social, and governance. And really, pardon my French, but all of these acronyms make me think I need to go back to school and learn to spell. It's no wonder that some of us are saying WTF when we hear the word ESG. Really, ESG is stewardship. It's an opportunity not to just have a deeper understanding of risks, but also brand enhancement, engaging customers, partnering with new suppliers, streamlining operations, and preparing for unseen issues such as pandemics. You're probably asking yourself, okay, well, why is ESG important to the construction sector? Well, on this slide, we have three common principles. We have the better performance, regulatory and voluntary initiatives, and investor demands. These are common for any industry or sector, but I know that they probably sound a bit generic to you. Ultimately, companies will either avoid costs by doing these three things, or anticipate environmental and social opportunities to create financial or even shared value. And I think what's really important to also bring up is the fact that ESG now is the most commonly used terms in the capital markets. Now, I realize there are a lot of construction companies that are not listed on, the TSX or New York Stock Exchange. But, there is that need if one day there is a decision that needs to be made about, okay, do we need to go ahead and list? Here's an opportunity that will help you get listed if that's something that your company desires. So basically, ESG is the value and corporate social responsibility is the values. But you're probably still asking yourself, why is ESG important? At the company level, these are the reasons, and I can see that you see multiple bullet points on this slide, but I just want to touch on a few. And these are, you can win new business. You can attract, retain, and motivate employees, especially those millennials. You can build community goodwill. You can discover new ways of doing business with new partners, joint venturing, and you can also improve the value of your company to future owners or future investors for that matter. So I'll touch on all of these throughout my presentation, but I think the construction companies really need to focus on the ones that are in bold on this slide. And as I like to think about it with ESG in any industry, what is really important is good people, so leadership and vision, plus good teams, thinking along the lines of empathy and engagement, and both of these equal strong results, which equals resilience, which equals trust, which ultimately is the foundation for ESG. So ESG in the construction sector, the current state right now, it really has pushed to the forefront ESG. And as we spent a lot of time at home as well, the construction and even real estate sector are really key sectors for that Build Back Better slogan and line that's constantly being circulated. But ESG considerations will become all the more vital in the coming years for all types and sizes of construction companies. There's the movement for cleaner and greener construction industry, the encouraging of net zero carbon buildings, more sustainable industry and building back better, and always showing how one is building back better. And then the ecological responsibility of business practices and projects that consumers demand. This is probably a timely time to raise the issue of in the current state of the sad construction sector example. And this one happened 2 weeks ago. And it's the high-rise condo building in Surfside, Florida. It partially collapsed, leaving 46 people dead and another 94 people missing. I realize ESG measures wouldn't have saved this tragedy from happening, but it will help in the recovery, maybe even build some resilience and remediation in the building sector. So ESG in the construction sector, another kind of current state, but more broadly, is the fact that climate change is playing a huge role. And, we're looking at a sector that uses, combined with the real estate sector as well, 32% of natural resources. It's also the World Council for Sustainability Business sees that, the built environment generates 30% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I realize these are stats that may come more from like the European Union because they've passed more regulations. They require ESG planning and disclosures for both the real estate and construction sectors. And ESG doesn't have the compliance, regulation, and policy weight in Canada. That's the same in Europe, but it's slowly coming along. And we're certainly going to see that heightened when, we have, building issues as we did in Florida. So adopting an ESG standard in Canada may come about by balancing the public pressure and then government regulation as well. And this is a key area for the construction sector to show its ESG weight and strength, muscle. I also understand that you're probably asking yourself, well, what do I need to know but the construction industry? Like, what do I need to move forward with this as quickly as possible? Well, here are some key ESG metrics. So with the rising demands from regulators, clients, investors, and even employees to reduce the construction sector's environmental impact and accelerate ESG, there is an opportunity to also help at the company level. And these are some metrics that can. But for the purpose of this slide, I only brought in the E and the S elements for the construction sector. I have some examples for the G as well in brackets, and I put that in brackets for a reason, because I'm going to raise those G issues, governance, a little bit later in the presentation. But with regard to the E and the S metrics that are listed here on the slide, pick 4 or 5 elements. So key ones that come to mind right away, I would say, would be the greenhouse gas emissions, material use, waste generation, human capital management, and, a big one that's coming more and more to the forefront for every sector really is that data privacy and cybersecurity. So protecting not only your consumers and your own data, but also those of your partners. And, there is also the ongoing need for safety and cohesion. Really, all of these metrics are very important for a company to keep in mind and enforce. But I think what's an action point that really needs to take place in the ESG environment for the construction sector is the necessity for companies to use social media channels. The pandemic brought that to the forefront. Reputations have been made and lost on not using social media or not using it properly. So environmental sustainability, here's a great example for the construction industry, and it's concrete, which is the most widely used man-made material, second to water, as the most consumed resource as well. A report cited by the Chatham House in London states that construction and real estate sector combined equates to about 8% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. But there are alternatives to concrete that can lower the environmental impact or footprint. For example, grasscrete is a method of laying concrete that allows for grass and other flora to grow and improve stormwater absorption and drainage. While these alternatives may not be an option for some projects and maybe for another, there are still other options for concrete buildings to target lower emissions. Nevertheless, the responsibility to reduce those, carbon emissions is a strong focus. And here's where PhilConnect could likely help, because they deal with recyclable materials. Concrete is a recyclable material, and it's one that PhilConnect can help you with in the construction sector, or even other sectors that you might be working with, oil and gas, mining, among others. Another great example of environmental sustainability is reducing utility consumption. And this is something we can do both on a personal and professional company level. So speaking of options, the utility consumption is an area that's really needs to be highlighted. MIT has done research on it, and saving energy not only helps the environment, but also reduces operating costs. And a way of doing this is also using non-fossil fuel options that can be considered, such as energy efficiency, renewables, and transition fuels like LNG, liquefied natural gas. And the next being the S, the social responsibility piece. And this is a piece that's very close and dear to my heart, and again, brought to the forefront by the pandemic, because it puts a spotlight on what is called the social license to operate. Sometimes a hard, nebulous area to connect with in our society, but one that I think we all understand as being, important to on that personal, individual level, and, on that company level as well. So health, safety, and environment and wellness programs, they really contribute heavily to employees' overall engagement in the business. Also, and as we've been hearing throughout the past year, is diversity and inclusion programs are becoming prominent. And even animal welfare programs and children's rights programs, the right to play, the right for an education. And this is where I think the construction industry, with the support of other areas of the business or the built environment, could really be quite helpful. And then, of course, just, when we're looking at the building on the, architect's table, or, we're at the site, we're looking at things where we can have collaborative spaces like rooftop terraces or parks, connecting tenants to property and reducing the likelihood of turnover, whether it's leaseholders whether it's a co-op building or, whether they own or rent their unit. Now, I know in my previous slide about governance, I really want to touch upon it now on the responsible governance piece. And this is where ESG has really brought to the forefront in the sustainability sector and corporate social responsibility as well, using those terms interchangeably. This has been brought to the forefront, the governance piece of ESG, because before, really, there wasn't a lot of governance in sustainability. Of course, there was compliance and regulations in certain parts of the world. Maybe some boards of companies would discuss it. Sometimes the CEO would become a champion for sustainability. But at the same time, the G now, in the current present environment that we are in, it is looking at the profits, it's looking at the purpose, and it's looking at the policy, and it's looking at those all in tandem. And it's a really interesting statistic here from the World Sustainability Council, and that has to do with 90% of REITs, so that is the real estate investment trusts, have at least one female board member. And the number of total female REIT board members has grown in the last 2 years. I mean, by 50%. That's very significant. And that's all been done by balancing interests, looking at strategy, risk management, performance, and disclosure. And then a fourth bullet, and the one that's highlighted in red here, the culture provides varying perspectives and backgrounds to corporate decisions. And that is key to helping a business grow that has an ESG purpose. And that brings me to the next slide of, how to become ESG ready. And I know that's probably right on I should have just jumped to this slide right away, but I wanted to give you some background before that. And, it's important to think that some companies, and this is in an ESG mindset, they're motivated by the desire for social change and see responsibility to help protect the environment. But others are looking for the financial benefit through reduced operating costs and lower turnover of residents. Both of those scenarios are balanced, and both of them are just as important. And ESG really does validate both of those, as opposed to previously where CSR, sustainability, didn't so much, or even health, safety, and environment. But if a company is still not sure how to position themselves in ESG, I have some 4 questions here that might be of assistance. So one is, how does your company tackle new initiatives? What specific ESG risks or opportunities does your company face? Think back to slide 14 when I had the list of different ESG metrics. What is your company saying about these risks? You'll pick 4 or 5 of those elements. What is your company doing about these risks? And, it can be a very simple, partnership opportunity. It can be a simple initiative. It can be, engaging a consultant or working in collaboration with a not-for-profit or one of your suppliers. So really, these questions will kick off addressing and drafting your ESG position statement. And that's at any size of business. So your micro, your small, and your medium. And I think what I'd like to also bring up in this slide is the need for engagement. And there's different ways you can engage at each level of size of construction company. So in the micro level, you're looking for relationships with your customers and your suppliers. Once you make it up to the small, maybe you're looking at community and locally based relationships. At the medium size, you're looking to collaborate on decision-making process with internal stakeholders. So that's like within your departments and of course external as well. But never forget that, you have your stakeholders as well in the internal. And then on the large size companies, you're looking to likely streamline your bureaucracy and, get support from joint venture partners as well. And that will show very well if, you're going to go to the stage of being listed on a stock exchange, or you're going to be, promoting or trying to, grab the attention of a bank for a loan. So ESG disclosure frameworks. Now, ESG will never be, without reporting. So I had to bring this up. And, once you've got your position statement, drafted and hopefully published externally, that's very key, and putting it out there on the social media as well to let your stakeholders know. The next step is to settle how to measure and communicate your progress on your ESG programs and initiatives. So currently there are no regulated benchmarks or reporting systems in Canada, but some tools are being commonly used in the real estate sector and in the construction sector that may help build the construction sector's profile as well. So that's almost like a piggyback approach. So these four are the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. So it's the highest, has very high participation rates. It's directly targeting real estate portfolios. You may already have been interviewed by some of the REITs that you might be working with. And then there's the Carbon Disclosure Project. It's a not-for-profit. It's global, again, and it scores cities and companies on ESG standards, specifically relating to carbon and water usage. And then the next one would be the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or better known as SASB. I know all these acronyms, alphabet soup we call it. This one is industry specific to sustainability. There's different supplements, about 77 of them. There is one for the construction and real estate sector, and it really does look at ESG information that's pertinent to investors in a cost-effective way. But again, you don't have to be a listed company to look at SASB. You can be a private company. Many private companies are mapping their priorities, their ESG ones, of course, to the SASB framework. Then I'm sure that you've heard of this one. It's called the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI. It's been around for about 20 odd years. It's international again. It's very independent, and it's for businesses and governments, and it's to help communicate the ESG factors. Not so much on the investor side, more on the stakeholder side, but certainly very important for tracking and for, really bringing the story and narrative of your program together. So I realize even these disclosures seem like quite a lot, but each have performance indicators and benchmarks that could even help you draft your ESG position statement. And some organizations may use multiple frameworks and guidances, but for the construction sector, these four are really important. It's also very important for the construction sector to be aware of the UN guiding the UN development goals. And there's 17 of them. They're known as the SDGs. And it's a real standalone disclosure. And I really did want to bring your attention to this on its own, because the SDGs were developed in 2015 by the UN, by the various member countries of the UN, and they're a call to action for all countries to promote prosperity, and even companies, I shouldn't say not just countries, while protecting the planet. And banks have started to use the SDGs to determine if a company meets the ESG investment qualification. So very important, great to have on your website as well. And the three goals that I see the construction sector as really leading the way and should be acknowledging continuously are number 9, which is goal industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities. And goal number 13, climate change. Now, you're probably thinking, I need some examples now, and I want to see some successful ones, and then I also want to see some not so successful examples of ESG in the construction sector. So a successful example of ESG in Vancouver is Concert Properties. They partnered with the City of Vancouver Hey Neighbor program. And the Hey Neighbor program is a resident-led initiative aimed at increasing social connectedness, neighborliness, and resilience in multi-unit buildings. This is achieved by encouraging residents to get to know others through the building planning activities organized by resident animators. So this is everything from the architect's plans on the table, straight through to exploring options of how to build and working with construction companies, these resident animators, interfacing with construction industry and the real estate industry. And Concert Properties is one that has led the way on that option and that program. But another example is the large REIT called Bentall Green Oak, and they're a developer as well. And they're doing what they call future-proofing their portfolio by measuring projects through an ESG lens via the input of their key players, they call them: investors, tenants, employees, community, and industry. And it's really interesting. Every quarter they publish these different reports on how each of those 5 player groups are staying connected to Bentall Green Oak in their global portfolio of real estate projects. But not leaving off the table that there are failed examples of ESG as well. And one that just comes to mind, and I realize it's not a construction project, but it's certainly one that hits home, is Rio Tinto, the Yukon Gorge Caves in Pilbara in Northwest Australia. This is a very sad example of thousands of years of history being lost. They were excavating for Pilbara ore, which is very well known, iron ore that is, in that area of Northwest Australia. It's a world-leading mineral site, but sadly, it really showed a lack of stewardship and a lack of accountability. And that really raises my point of ESG is about stewardship at all levels of of a company, but also at all levels of an industry as well, and showing that. And in this case, this example, that wasn't the case. So I realized that some due diligence on the part of Rio Tinto did take place, and the governments involved, but at a community level, and even within their internal departments of these companies and organizations, recommendations were overlooked by the company leadership before the final decision was made. So it was a very sad situation. And ultimately, community buy-in really is just as important as executive buy-in with a project. But returning to my original example of the construction industry, and I realize ESG wouldn't have saved this building collapsing in Miami, or Surfside, Florida. That's where it was, outside of Miami. But it's particularly worrying because buildings such as that one are very vulnerable because it's at sea level and with sea level rise, and it was built on limestone, which is a particularly worrisome combination because the water goes through instead of being held back. So it's almost like a porous fiber, and it also then exacerbates corrosion over time. So something to be very concerned about in the area of ESG in the construction sector. So my final slide is debunking common ESG myths. And again, I'm taking you back to a more broad and generic one, but these are the ones I hear all the time, these myths. So number one, you don't need a glossy report for sustainability. Well, yes, that is true, but you also do need to have, an Excel spreadsheet to track material issues or even to manage risk. You need something. It may not be a report, I understand, but you need something to track those issues and risks. Expensive, so only useful for a listed company. Not true. It's important for companies and their employees to be a part of. Comes at the expense of an investment's performance. Not true. It's, not more expensive, but it does have more value, and it requires that. And because more time and parties need to be engaged. The fourth point, investors only talk about ESG. They don't really consider it. Not true. The investment bank Morgan Stanley analyzed 10,723 funds from 2004 to 2018. They found there was no financial trade-off in the returns of sustainable funds or traditional funds. And they also commenced their own index from that study called MSCI. And it's all focused on ESG. And then the fifth, it's a fad or hot topic with limited options available due to it being a new investment strategy. That's not true. a number of higher education institutes, both vocational and academic, are incorporating ESG or sustainability into their programs. These programs indicate that ESG knowledge will be crucial for future leaders to accurately analyze and financial data. On a personal note, I studied last year investor relations with the Canadian Investor Relations Institute and Rotman at the University of Toronto, and I focused my studies on ESG. So I'm definitely an example of that, and I'm happy to share that. But thank you for listening to my presentation today, and I'm looking forward to your questions, and I'm going to be handing you back to Hoida now.
Well, thank you so much, Isobel. This was a great overview, and you definitely gave us some insights on how ESG can apply to the construction industry. And I really love that part about the different company sizes. So sometimes we might think that ESG might only apply to large organizations or companies that plan to go on the stock exchange, but really ESG affects us all when we're talking about environmental, social, and governance. And I loved how you divided them. Like for the small companies, even if it's a micro company, there's an opportunity for them to have that statement or even look into it. And as the company size grows, or based on the applications of how they want to be, maybe they might want to engage a consultant or even have a full-time staff or even have a department if it's a huge company. So I think that this is definitely an evolving topic, as you might have said, and it has varying factors. Now, before I open it up to more questions, I do know that we have on the call with us Mana here today, CEO of PhilConnect. And Mana, you did have some questions for us. Do you want to start with yours before we take it up to the chat?
Hi. So yeah, this was a great presentation, Isobel. Thank you so much. And as someone who has worked in the industry for 20 years in construction industry, I can see that more and more companies, and especially owners like the government, going towards that, having that requirement and the tender documents even for qualification. So the price is not the only thing that matters to get a project. They really look at how you exactly those things: environment, social, and governance, like how companies deal with that. And I can see that having ESG help you to be qualified for that next project. So a couple of questions I had. One is in terms of LEED. LEED is a rating mostly for buildings that's been around for a while. And just want to know how does that apply to ESG? Like how do you work?
Thank you. It's a very good question. Now, LEED is a standard. It's a certification. Well, not standard. Sorry, it's a certification for building. It's been around for many years, and we have some great buildings here in Vancouver that are LEED certified. One of them is up at UBC, and I think it was the first building in North America to be platinum LEED certified. It's the LK Choi building at UBC, to be exact. So I think it's really interesting. LEED as a certification, it could raise many of the elements and the metrics that are involved in ESG, but it is a certification and it does involve points. For example, I lived in the Middle East for about 7 years, and I had a client there in the energy sector who built a LEED platinum facility, and they brought in traditional elements of Arabic building style, and that would be the wind towers, and that's to help cool during the summer. They attempted to build those, but the challenge was the location of where the wind towers were. Traditionally, they were built in the 1700s, these wind towers, and people's work and personal lives are quite different now. So there was the challenge of, okay, it didn't cool enough, so AC options had to be looked at. And the way this company got around that was looking at energy efficient air conditioning units, but at the same time, they took it upon themselves to look at where they could get other points. And the other points they gained were through implementing and inserting bike racks around the facility. Unfortunately, bike racks are, kind of useless in the Gulf because it's so hot and there aren't bike paths. It's not like Vancouver. So they they benefited from getting the points, but they didn't, they circumnavigated it in a way that wasn't quite, ethical, I would say. So, and, or, in a way sustainable. So, there's an example of that with LEED. It's one of many, building certifications. I mean, there are other ones throughout the world. This one's quite popular in North America, but I can't say that it will make you an ESG leader. But it certainly will tick off some of the boxes around greenhouse gas emissions, energy efficiency, and there's that continuation of gaining and keeping the building certification up to code.
Yeah, thank you. And how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected our ESG reporting?
It's brought it more to the forefront. There's been a rise in it. There's a great interest in all the webinars that SASB is putting out and others. But also on the reporting side, it's making companies look more closely at, okay, yes, we have glossy sustainability reports, but maybe we need to add in different channels like video, also looking more at their social media. So making it less of an annual event and making it more of an ongoing, continuous event. It's also, too, the fact is, it's brought to the forefront that there are many disclosures out there and the need for companies to get up to, updated on those disclosures and look at not only just the disclosure documents and the frameworks, but also the indices and the aggregators where the data can come from. And that's across industries. So it's not just the actual company or the department. It's looking at, okay, we need to look at, broader sector information, whether that's being in Canada or North America or even globally. So, it's really has changed the reporting side of that. It's also too made it look like there may even be the possibility for reports to become more sector oriented as opposed to, company oriented. Boards are also more engaged in the reporting process because there's, ESG does bring in that governance piece, which is, very important to boards. And, there's a multitude of reasons why reporting has become more popular. And the fact is, too, a lot of sustainability reports are now shifting to being ESG reports because the investor is such a focus in ESG. And, we need to not only as a company, but as a society, be looking at, okay, as investors, and that could be on a community level, that could be in the more traditional, retail and institutional investors, where are we playing? And, we need to report as well.
So you mentioned reporting. What about integrating ESG with financial reporting? Does that
Good question. Work? Definitely happening now because ESG has brought another to the forefront, the financial side of sustainability, which didn't always have, as much of a say because, sustainability often sat in comms departments or government relations. But certainly there is that now growing awareness of integrated reporting. So there's, companies that are looking at, okay, we're not going to have an ESG report. We're not going to have a sustainability report. We're going to have an integrated report. And we're going to be looking at SASB. We're going to be looking at, continue with GRI, but we're also going to look at our, CDP. So it's bringing in those different reporting disclosures and saying, okay, and we want to have this as, let's say, in the environmental side, there would be natural capital and have that as a line item, maybe in a financial report. One company I worked for, very interesting, they integrated their ESG system or sustainability report. They did it by having a chapter in the annual report as opposed to a standalone report. And, as you know, the annual report is read by many people. So, it's, there's really an option to get creative. There's also been SASB and the integrated reporting corporate company, they've also now looked at combining efforts, and they are joining as a foundation now. So there will be a new standard coming out for ESG reporting that will support integrated reporting going forward.
And does ESG apply to hiring contractors and subcontractors?
Okay, that's really interesting, because that's where the partnership and collaboration piece comes in. That can be done through having a procurement checklist that has some ESG items on it, or its own ESG procurement checklist. It's also too, it's quite interesting too, because, your subcontractors, this is where you have to start looking at, okay, what are tier 1, tier 2? And the fact is too, are we engaging local staff? If the project is, I've worked on big energy projects in the oil and gas sector, and you're looking at, okay, can we look at a local option of procuring contractors and subcontractors? Maybe we look at apprenticeships, maybe we look at hire a student, those options. And of course too, in Canada, maybe we're even looking at, how we can engage an Indigenous company in a project. But those are two key items. And then it's also to the ongoing dialogue and feedback that is required, that a construction company can gain from their partners and joint ventures and their suppliers.
Yeah.
Around
Definitely that's already happening, not under ESG, but a lot of big government contracts have requirements of hiring subcontractors who are Indigenous, or have visible minority as their key positions, and for project management, for example, or other criteria. So that's already happening, but not under the name of ESG. But I can see that kind of standardize it, and if you have that, you already tick off those criteria, and it helps you with qualifying for the project.
Excellent. And, really, ESG is a conversation starter. It shouldn't be a conversation stopper.
Yeah.
And, being honest and saying, look, we want to report on our ESG, and these are the elements that are important to us. Supplier or partner X, can you help us with this? Can we help you with your ESG?
Yeah, excellent. And what about full-time employees?
Oh, well, full-time employees, they can be really a great bank of knowledge. A company can start an ambassadors program, champions program for ESG or sustainability, and that's a great way of getting input, because, often your employees are out in the front line. They're dealing with the customers, the clients, the suppliers, partners, so they receive input, give input, but also to, on that champion level or program level, this is where, the input of the board or, senior management executives and the employees, they can be combined together. It's almost like I said, the conversation starter, not the conversation stopper. And this is where also too, where a company can start to consider whether or not they need an ESG consultant or an ESG personnel member of their staff, and look at exploring those options going forward. So yes, the employees have a real opportunity to be engaged in the ESG journey and add to the narrative, which is another key term in ESG, is building the narrative. And an employee has that great option of building that narrative in support of the company they work for, because often employees don't get tapped for what they might be doing even outside in their voluntary or personal life that could add to the flavor and the richness of a company's ESG.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's a great point. Okay, those are all the questions I had. I think we have some questions on the chat. I can let Huwaida take over and go through those.
Thank you, Mana.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm checking the chat now, and if you wanted to see that as well, Isabel, we've got first of all was two comments from Biplab Som. It was something about like iOS system. It is required either through iOS organization or other way make it compulsory. So I guess it's just a comment, not a question. And then the second comment was about how the bank, ADB Bank, and other bank, HSB, are now they will, nobody will be eligible for funding from the bank. So I guess it's becoming a requirement for funding as well.
Absolutely, yes. And a report can be helpful, but sometimes what they want to see is more disclosure from other areas of ESG as well. And, that could mean, speaking to other departments within a company. And that, getting back to Mana's last question of engagement, well, ESG is cross department in a company. Everyone plays a role. So I think, getting back to this point here of the bank loans, well, often, yes, a sustainability report can help, but there's also usually a whole disclosure that they have as well, the bank, and in particular IFC funding, which I often work with, because many of my clients are in the developing world, and IFC funding is key to developing projects in that part of the world. So my understanding of frameworks you mentioned are that they guidance disclosures, policy frameworks that exist that could be used to identify reduction options in the construction sector. Now, yes, these can support reductions, these disclosures and frameworks. They give options. They're updated kind of on a continuous basis. However, they may not be actionable enough for the construction sector. They're more sort of best practices. That's how they I would be. And, the gentleman, as you raised, there's also the ISO standards, so the International Standards Association, and those could be, looked upon as certifications that are also key that need to be addressed. So you have your ISO 14001, the environmental one, ISO 18001, the quality one, or that's ISO 9000. Sorry, ISO 18000 is occupational health and safety. So those are, key to the construction sector. But the ESG disclosures really do have the finance side to it, but also they do bring in the environment, social, and governance. They may not immediate reductions, but they position for reductions in like greenhouse gas emissions, water management, and enhance on the social and governance side. The second question, so there are many opportunities related to GHG reduction strategies, so operations, reputation. Are there also other risks to keep in mind? Well, there is, on that slide that I presented, these opportunities can also be risks. There is the issue of water management. There's the funding risks. There's also the social risks, as we saw in Florida 2 weeks ago, of social cohesion happening, and the need to build community, because a built structure is not the community on its own. It's the people that are housed in that, and the risk that needs to take place there. And having worked in the energy sector, again, a term that I threw in there, the social license to operate, or SLOW as it's called as an acronym, that really raises the issue of risk in the social side of ESG. And that's looking at, your reputation, how you engage, and, how you engage over a long period. Engagement isn't a one-shot thing. It's also looking at, the gender issues and how you engage other parties. And in Canada, really what is so key and I don't like to call it an area of risk, but is the Indigenous relations piece. And I can see in the construction sector right now what has been happening over the last 3 weeks with all the discoveries at different residential schools. There is the challenge of, okay, to build forward, we need to also be operating with a different lens when we are looking at stakeholders, and even some of those stakeholders may be investors.
Excellent points. Excellent points. Okay, so I see no more questions. I'm going to put the link so people can connect with you because I do know that you have another call in like a few minutes. So I'm going to just put here in the chat. Please do connect with Isobel on LinkedIn as well, and we will be sending out the replay and as well as the checklist that you had prepared for us, Isobel. So that will be part of the package. And while we're here, before we go, I wanted to first of all thank you for joining us and also invite you to next month's presentation, which is dealing with soil contaminants and construction sites. And we're going to have with us Sonia Shukri. She has over 30 years experience in the industry, and she'll be walking us through some of the best practices. And also, I'd like to invite you to share your experience as well and knowledge. The Earth Exchange Forum is really about us sharing lessons learned, our expertise, our case studies. And if you'd like to present at any time, please do reach out to me, or you can just apply on the Earth Exchange Forum, and we'd love to host you, just like we have here today, where you can share your expertise and have questions. Wonderful. So we're going to respect everyone's time right now. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure. And remember, we're all ESG stewards, and looking forward to the next session. Thank you, Huwaida. Thank you, Nana.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.